Welcome to Sundays with Hank. This is video number 6, I believe. And I want to thank those of you out there that have been commenting on the other videos. Some of the comments have some great stories in the comments. So if some of you haven't read the comments of some of the past videos, you might want to go back. You can search Sundays with Hank on Facebook, and you can find them easier, the past videos. But there are some stories that I think are probably better than the stories that I've been telling, and they're told by a few of you that have been making comments on the videos. Another memory about Hank, and I don't know when this occurred, and Carl talked about this in what he wrote for me back in the first video, was when he drove the wrong way on I-57. I don't know why he was on the road, but or whether he'd been drinking at the time. It was just another reason for people to say that he really was crazy. It could have been the time that he had attended Itcy Jones's baseball camp. Carl Mauck had told me the story about Hank going to Itcy Jones baseball camp at SIU one summer. Itchy couldn't believe his eyes when he did his usual scan of his new crop of campers. In this group was a man that looked like he was someone's grandpa. When he got to Hank, Hank simply told him that he wanted to learn how to throw a knuckleball. Itchy couldn't believe it, but Hank stayed the whole camp all week and did all the drills with the kids. Another story that Carl jogged my memory with had to do with I call the called shot. Remember the home run that Babe Ruth called? Well, something similar happened during an American Legion All-Star game. The game took place in Fairfield, and there was a carnival going on past the center field fence. There was the biggest tent, I believe, that I had ever seen just beyond the center field fence. When Hank saw the tent before the game, we were all kind of sitting in the dugout. He proceeded to shout out to everybody that Carl Mauck would hit a ball over the fence, center field, and hit that tent during the ball game. And guess what? Sure enough, Carl did hit that tent with a mammoth shot in that All-Star game. Hank was around most of my years of Legion baseball, but he didn't ever seem to get as excited as he was the summer of 1968 when we won the district tournament. In another video later on, I will talk about that championship team from the summer of 1968. The older I got, I had other things on my mind, like girls and cars. Hank would always ask Kathy, my future wife, if she wanted a Coke. He wouldn't talk baseball with her. He'd just say, "I don't know a lot about cheerleading, but I tell you one darn thing, boys just don't want to practice baseball. Too many other things on their minds." Kathy doesn't seem to remember, but I keep reminding her that Hank, he would buy her a Coke every time he would see her, but he also bought her a coat, C-O-A-T, a coat from Judy's that was on the southwest corner of the square, and I believe that was before we were married. The next group of stories I call drinking, softball, Shanghaied, and cancer. During the summer of 1976, my wife Kathy and I had a few taped conversations with Hank. I had come up with the idea of writing something about him. The stories about Hank were legendary, and I thought they would make for a great story, a good book. The interviews, though, I didn't think were legendary, and neither did Hank. We found out that Hank Mormon had had a fairly normal but troubled life. Hank had always wanted to live like a man is supposed to live. The first memory Hank had was from 1927. He was 3 years old, and he had fallen out of a buggy, and one of the wheels ran over him. This was a trip to his grandmother's. His youth, according to Hank, started out on the wrong side. In 1929, at the age of 5, he was called Gene, his middle name Eugene. Hank's real name was Ira Eugene Mormon. He had known all the bootlegging joints in Hamilton County. His father had taken him to all of them. Gene would drink and drink just like his father. His home life was a little less than desirable for a child to grow up with a sound mind. His father, and these were Hank's words, his father was a drunken, sarcastic, gambling man who earned a good living but couldn't please his wife. Constant arguing filled Gene's ears from his parents. He was constantly being yelled at, and he says he was constantly beaten. One thing that always stuck with Hank his whole life was his mom telling his father that she wished he were dead. This happened one night after Hank's father had come home drunk and filthy. That had stuck with him, and it would hurt him very much every time he thought of it. Home wasn't the only place he was yelled at and beaten. At school, he had a teacher, and I'm not going to mention that teacher's name, who would just as soon knock you over a table as to look at you. That teacher and Hank's father traveled and gambled and drank together. Hank would receive Old Hickory at school for not getting his lessons. There was another teacher, and I'll give his name. Inman Moore was another teacher, and Hank said he was a nice, quiet man, but he still got 2 whippings from him. At home, his chores included things like milking the cows, gathering the eggs, and working in the orchard and watermelon patch. He was always walking someplace. He would use an old rag or string ball that wasn't so heavy and could throw it like a bullet. Everyone practiced and played ball every day. While Hank was in high school, his family had a good car, and he was never out of money. He shot pool plenty of nights, but wishes he had gone to a lake somewhere instead. One of the stories I didn't tell about Judge Jones was that he was Hank's age, grew up with Hank in high school, and Hank actually taught the judge how to drive a car using Hank's dad's car. He thought high school was worthless. He thought that softball was invented about that time. Later on, I'll be reading a lot of Mormonisms where Hank just hated softball. He thought that was a ruination of baseball. Mr. Nation was the coach and would hand them a softball and bat and tell the kids to go play and get lost, he said. Anyway, he thought that softball had started in the schools around that time. He spoke of Mr. Nation and his coaching ability. He said he could sure coach basketball, but he sure couldn't coach baseball. During his senior year, he was fed up with life and was suicidal. It was constantly on his mind. School was not enjoyable. He wanted to quit and go to the Navy, but his father wouldn't go for it. A lot of people had nothing in those days. In 1936, a drought caused crops to be lost. And in 1937, we had too much water, Hank pointed out in the interview. He came to town, McLeansboro, at the age of 12, and stayed with an old lady and her daughter, he said. Didn't give me their names. He served 6 years, 1942 to 1948, in the Navy, and he served 5 years, 1948 to 53, in the Army. He wanted to be a petty officer. Somehow he found out the questions, though, to the mechanics exam. He passed and had to do mechanics work then, which he claimed to know nothing about. That's about par for the course, I think, for Hank. Hank got Shanghaied into going to Augusta, Georgia, in the service. They didn't like him there. He had lost his personal initiative. The old captain had asked if he wanted a discharge, and he argued with him. As a result, he was transferred to Germany as an interpreter. But he couldn't speak German. He got along with everyone there. They liked him. Then one day they found that he had done work as a mechanic, so they sent him to Marine school. He was married in Germany, and then he was transferred to France, and he and his wife had a baby girl. It was there that he got fed up with the Army and quit. Hank's dad died in 1945 and his grandmother had passed away, so in 1948, between stints with the Navy and Army, he sold his farm, and later he could never forgive himself for selling it. In 1953, he came back to the States with his wife and baby to no home. He traveled all over the state of Illinois looking for work, but they would always find out about his not-so-honorable discharge. He attended SIU and studied forestry for 2 years. He couldn't cut the chemistry, so he dropped out. Hank took a job in the penitentiary at Sheridan. The colonel, as Hank called him, was warden, and the colonel didn't want anyone with nerve trouble working for him, and by now, Hank's nerves were shot. So the colonel fired him one day. And by the way, I'm going to tell here, most of us thought Hank was shell-shocked, and I asked him about that, and he said, no, that was not something that happened to him. It was just a legend around here, I guess, that we all thought. Hank was disabled because of his nerves, he said. He didn't have the stability to take on problems. Everything he tried was wrong. Hank felt that what made him disabled was not the service, but being yelled at and screamed at as a kid and knowing nothing but a bar and booze. He had had an unhappy home as a child, and now as an adult he was disabled. And by the way, Hank gave me permission to, during the interview, I asked him about this. I said, do you want me to tell people about this? And he said, yes. I wanted to help somebody. I just wanted to live, Charlie and Kathy. I just wanted to live like a man should live and be what a man should be. Without a job or money, Hank wrote the VA in Marion. They wanted him to go to Danville to be evaluated psychologically. They locked him up, and over the years, Hank would return to Danville. We always thought he went there to act like he was crazy, so he would be able to receive a pension for disability. It was between these visits to Danville that we saw Hank and knew him. During our interview, Hank confirmed that he had cancer. We had heard it around town, but didn't really believe it. You know, what could you really believe about Hank, we thought. There were so many stories about him. Even before he died, we heard another story about how he had purchased a life insurance policy. And that was in what Carl had written about just before he died. Carl Mauck had visited Hank to show him some game films of Carl playing professional football. Hank had always wanted Carl to play professional baseball, and Carl wanted to show Hank what he did for a living. I think Carl wanted Hank's approval before Hank died. Hank did tell him that he guessed football was okay. It was during that visit that Hank showed the life insurance policy to Carl. Carl had had experience in the insurance business and found that the policy looked legit. He was a true friend to Hank, and there aren't too many of them to come by in a lifetime. Carl had always made sure that Hank had a ride to every ball game when Carl played during high school, and now he was still showing his friendship and appreciation for Hank. Next time on Sundays with Hank, I'll be reading some more things from others. The first will be from a writer by the name of Joe Aaron. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this edition of Sundays with Hank.